Thank you. Hi, folks. Thanks for having me today. I think I'm dependent on someone to get me going there. Has anyone here actually heard of PageCloud before? Could you raise your hand? I want to do a spot brand awareness test. Got a few people. Okay, that's great. So the inspiration for my talk today is this. Every child is born an artist, and the problem is how to remain an artist when we all grow up. It was Picasso that said that. And not only is that the inspiration for my talk today, but it's also become the inspiration for currently my life's work. And I believe we have a serious problem. I think the web has a giant usability problem. And what I mean by that is there's a relatively small number of people on a percentage basis that have the ability to freeform create something from scratch and share it with the world. And the rest of the world, therefore, is stuck filling in the blanks of these rigid template things that look like 1,000 other people who downloaded that same template that day. Or they have to hire some highly trained people who are usually kind of expensive and wait for them to do it and wait weeks or months to get the job done. And the worst thing is that after that upfront investment, any change that you want to make that doesn't require dropping down to source code is limited to things like maybe fixing a little bit of text or swapping an image in place. But that's a far cry from being able to be creative and create something from scratch. And if you're one of the professionals that's doing this for people, you're probably being nagged on a regular basis by some of your clients who want to make simple changes, and you kind of wish that they could just do it themselves. And if you don't perceive this to be a problem, I'm willing to bet it's because you've already sunk the cost into learning that HTML and CSS, which may have taken up to years, certainly months at least, or you're one of the people charging $1,000 a day and making a very good living. But either way, you've probably forgotten what it was like when you couldn't do that for yourself, and it sucks. So the world basically breaks down like this. There's two groups of people. There's those, there's about 1% or 2% that know the HTML and the CSS, and they can create anything they want anytime from scratch. And then there's the others who don't know it, and they're limited to filling in these blanks. Or if they want to create something truly custom, they end up paying someone $10,000 or $20,000 and waiting for it to be done. And it's basically a situation of the haves versus the have-nots. And I think that this is just fundamentally wrong. Because I believe that freeform creation and expression on the world's greatest medium, the World Wide Web, should be accessible to absolutely everybody. And I want to take you through a little walk through history and look at the history of content management systems. The first one is this. It was the printing press. And it came around the 1400s. Depending on who you believe, it was either Gutenberg or a Chinese inventor that came up with this 10 years earlier. But it was a long time ago. And at the time, it was this miracle invention, because for the first time ever, it allowed millions of people worldwide to publish written texts, and they previously couldn't. And it was a labor-intensive process where highly skilled craftspeople painstakingly set up these printing press machines, and at least once it was done, though, they could stamp out the written word, and it was accessible to millions. And this should sound awfully familiar. Because fast forward about 500 years later, in the mid-50s, when we've got the boom of the newspaper industry, we've still got these highly trained craftsmen painstakingly putting in place these little letters to make the printed word available to millions. So the creation process hadn't really changed in 500 years. At least we'd figured out how to scale up distribution. Now, another 50 years after this, and God love him, we've got people like Eli the computer guy, who is teaching people about little cryptic codes to mark up letters and text on a digital page so that it can be accessible to millions. You should see a recurring theme here. Not much has really changed. You see, building HTML templates for modern CMSs today is still a labor-intensive process to set rigid page layouts done by highly trained people so that the content can be available to millions. And all we really want is this. We want our content to be accessible to millions. But this is a problem. It's incredibly costly and time-consuming, and when we're done, we get these rigid structures that are hard to bust out of, and the people that know how to do this are, on a percentage basis, pretty rare. Now, in the 1990s, we invented this thing called CSS, and fast forward today, it's still the predominant technology for page layout on the web. And most of you have seen these CSS jokes about how ridiculously complicated it is to get something to just align properly. One of them talks about landing on a moving comet 300 million miles away, and yet we can't get that little red X inside the box. And CSS is a deeply flawed technology, and that's not just my opinion. In our industry, it's actually been documented as a deeply flawed technology, things like the CSS box model. And what happened was, by the time we got enough experience under our belt using this technology, we realized how flawed it was. There were so many websites out there that the pragmatic approach was simply to document the flaws and keep rolling, because we didn't want to break all those websites. And CSS was actually designed to solve a very simple problem. If you had a website of 20 or 30 pages and you wanted to change your link color from green to red, you didn't want to have to do that 20 times in a text editor. So boom, CSS was born. But the core assumption was you're using a text editor to create web pages. So what happens if that assumption is no longer true? Does that make any sense anymore? And let's face it, CSS and HTML, these are machine codes. They're designed for machines. They're designed to tell a machine how to do something when it comes to layout, and they're not designed for humans. Now, in 1981, we had these really basic word processing applications. And here's a couple screenshots. They look pretty silly. But we would use these cryptic little codes to get bold text and italics. And I think both of these were actually before the days of different typefaces. So they look horribly archaic. Because, I mean, fast forward to today, and look what we have now. I think we've actually updated the colors or something. But not a lot has actually changed. This is still the state of modifying a page layout for a modern content management system. This is a space that's been stuck in the mud for 20 years. And history has shown us that when people are given a choice to interact with a computer in a visual way versus a computer or machine language, they always gravitate towards the visual way. Just look at the rise of graphical user interfaces versus that small number of people that still choose to use a command line. So in the mid-'80s, somebody invented WYSIWYG. I really should look up who it was. But we all know it stands for what you see is what you get. And what it represented was the ability for the masses, for the first time, to do free-form, like create from scratch publishing in their home. And it almost single-handedly spawned the PC revolution. It was like having a printing press in your living room. And when this happened, that inner child artist took over. Because people have an innate desire to create content and share it with the people around them. And the invention of WYSIWYG gave everyone a creative freedom over this canvas that they could create with, not just fill in the blanks. And yet, even though this WYSIWYG capability was invented almost 30 years ago, designing content on the web is still closer to a printing press than desktop publishing, at least until now. Now, on November 30th, 2015, so a little before 2016, we publicly launched PageCloud, and we've recreated that free-form creative experience that we know and love on the desktop right in your browser. Now, other people have tried this before. It's really, really hard. And unfortunately, they've all failed because it's so hard. They've come up with toyish prototype-like approximations of what it is on the desktop, but nobody's really nailed it until now. PageCloud really is the world's most advanced website creator. Now, we've got some dozens of world firsts that are baked in, a few of which I'm going to show you today, and it's built on this rich experience of desktop publishing and some deep technology that really just gets out of your way. It tears down the walls between the content that exists on your desktop and the content that exists everywhere on the web. It requires no coding, and for the first time ever, really brings this ability to create from scratch, not just fill in the blanks of a template. And so our mission is this. We want to bring free-form publishing and creative expression to everyone with an internet connection, not just professionals. We want to move the web publishing problem from this like printing press model to more of a blank canvas where everyone who wants to participate gets to participate. And for the professionals in the room, if you're a designer or you're a developer, of course we love you too. We want to be like the jetpack. It allows you to climb higher and faster than you ever have before and keep you out of the weeds. So I'm going to show you some tech today. And what I want to do is package it up into sort of 7 core beliefs that are the roadmap, the technology roadmap for PageCloud and why we do things the way we do them. These beliefs form that foundation. Now, the first core belief is this. A template, by design, at best, is only ever going to be 60% of what you want. And, there are thousands to choose from, but let's think about that for a second. Tell me in what area of your life are you satisfied with a 60% score? Personally, that's just not good enough. And when you go template shopping, you feel great because there are thousands of them out there, and you get this kind of serotonin hit in your little pleasure center. And you think, oh, I can have this or I can have that. It's like window shopping. And then you maybe swap a logo or you put in some text and you think, wow, I've created something. That's awesome. But it doesn't take very long before you're back to this. The pain begins. You immediately trip over something that the template just doesn't support, and you start fighting with that template, and inevitably you have to drop to writing HTML and CSS code. And you're trying to work around the thing that you just bought. Now, the worst part is that by hacking this template, you're creating this delicate maintenance nightmare for yourself. Or you have to hire someone and wait for them to make the changes for you. This is great for service providers, but it's terrible for the person that owns the property and just wants to get something done and get back to work. Now, it's important to note that WordPress, for example, is essentially a labor market. I mean, WordPress is open source software, and that movement started, I think, around 15 or 20 years ago. And if you remember back then when it was first sort of invented, because prior to that, everybody charged for everything, and free software was really novel at the time. Nobody had ever done that before, or not many people had done it. And the business model was this: give a product away, charge for services. The very model alone says that we don't want everybody doing this, we want professionals charging for it. And what incentive do you think that the people that are building these things have to allow people to do it themselves? Actually, not very much incentive at all. And I believe what people really want is to be able to start with a pre-built design. I mean, we call them canvases. I think that the word template's a bit of a dirty word. But then you should be able to make it 100% your own. And so here what you see is manipulating content in a very familiar desktop publishing-y way. It's happening in the browser. I'm in full screen mode, so you can't see the browser Chrome, but this is any modern browser. And the PageCloud editor lets you do just that. So we're going to grab a couple photos, and we'll use the palette, and we'll put a border on there. And then we'll rotate a few to make it look like just a random scattering of photos. And then we'll scroll down, and we'll make it change to our footer as well. And there's no CMS on the planet that gives you this kind of creative freedom. Now, the second core belief is this: you shouldn't have to fight with your technology. I mean, who's in charge, after all? The technology is supposed to be working for us. What we want is, I just want to make a simple change, like move that image 1 inch to the right. And what we get is, sure, just edit the HTML, edit the CMS, and don't forget to test it across browsers. And you probably have to learn the source code from the template author of that thing you just bought the day before. So what you really want to do is what you're used to on the desktop. Go to a page you own, hit edit, make some changes, hit save, and be done with it. So here we're going into the PageCloud editor. This time you can see the browser Chrome, and we're going to redesign this poster image. Move everything over to the left a little bit. We've moved our key image to the right. I'm going to make that button overlap. As you can see, it works with no hands. And our title shouldn't have been wrapping on 2 lines. That's a common sort of layout flaw with box templates. So we've redesigned this content. We'll move it all over to the center of the section, and we'll hit save, and it's done. And you can start to see that even with a few screen elements, the layout possibilities are basically infinite. You're in complete creative control at all times. So the next belief is this: the vast majority of the world's websites do not require a full CMS. It's a little bit like swatting a fly with like a dump truck. The vast majority of the world's sites are 30 pages or less, with reasonably static content and a little bit of dynamic widgets. Now, static content isn't a bad thing. Static just means you made that decision at design time. It's that text you wrote, or that image you chose, or that video you produced. Dynamic means something that changes at runtime, and usually from an arm's length. Maybe it's a stock ticker or a weather report or something that you don't know at design time. So most of the world's content is still relatively static. Now, it's important to note that what I'm talking about here mostly is websites and not blogs. And I want to clear up something that I think we've all kind of gotten wrong over the last several years. A website and a blog are different things. You see, in the blog world, we're talking about articles or posts. It's like a diary or a journal. And when you've got 50 of those posts, you benefit from rigid structures. You've got poster image, title, body, author, and you want all of them to be the same. But when you're talking about a website where you're expressing something, it's quite the opposite. You want freedom, you want freshness, you want to probably A/B test some things. You want to differentiate yourself from everybody else. So these are very, very different beasts. Now, most people already know how to do this desktop publishing visual editing thing. And only a few percentage know all of these HTML and CSS codes. And not only that, but all of the rules that come with figuring out how to interact with a CMS. So rather than forcing people to learn this foreign language to participate on the web, why don't we just leverage their existing knowledge? You know, CMSs by definition create these rigid structures that put you in a box. And by design, they make it very, very difficult for you to break out of that box. Now, the fourth of 7 core beliefs that we have is that there's a current crop of what's called responsive web design techniques, which are, quite ironically, completely inaccessible to the masses. And what I mean by this is they're way too complicated. Not only do you need to know HTML and CSS, but of all the people that know that, I would say it's probably sort of like the top half that know how to do proper responsive web design because it's freaking complicated. You need to know about things like image optimization and multiple stop points and inheritance and media queries, and the list goes on and on. There's like books written on this stuff. And if we go back to first principles, we just want the same thing. We all want the same thing. We want our content to be accessible on all of the world's devices, desktops, laptops, tablets, and phones. And we want it to be beautiful everywhere. We don't want it to look like crap on one of those devices. But today's responsive web design doctrine will try to convince you that there's only a single way of solving this problem. And I don't buy it. Now, it works really well if you're charging $1,000 a day to do this for people. But remember, for everybody else, that sucks. And as it turns out, there's a faster, easier, and most importantly, more accessible way to accomplish our mission, which is to get our content available on all of the world's devices and have them looking beautiful everywhere. That's SEO friendly, outperforms most modern CMSs, and most importantly, anyone can do it. And I'm going to show you in a few minutes. Just before I do, the fifth core belief is that I believe web publishing tools need to start leaning back towards creativity and design and away from databases and source code. And I'd like to show you what that looks like. So here we're going to do a spot edit, and I'm going to relay this section out. So I want to make a random cluster of berries because two berries is not enough berries. So I copy this image and I paste it, and I'm going to flip it horizontally and flip it vertically with my editor, resize and rotate and position it. And I'll shrink this to push it to the background a little so it looks like the top ones are more in the foreground. And I grab these two objects and I group them as a single image so I can manipulate them as a set. And I move it to the center of my content. And I grab those text objects in that button and I move it to the center as well, and I overlap them artistically. But now my text is below my images. That doesn't work. So I cut it to the clipboard and I paste it, and now it's on top. But I've got purple text bleeding into a purple berry, and that's no good. So I grab the first letter and I change it to white. And now our text is legible again, and I've got this nice composited layout. Now, what you're seeing here is being creative and doing design right in the browser, as opposed to going back to Photoshop, being creative there, and then handing it off for production and writing code to do a deploy. This is a very different workflow. But most importantly, it's accessible to a vastly bigger audience than it is today. Now, the PageCloud editor in particular is feature complete with tools like Keynote and PowerPoint. It actually has most of the capabilities of Photoshop for compositing pages, and it happens right in your browser. And it's true WYSIWYG by definition. You're designing in the medium that you're going to be displaying in. It doesn't get any more WYSIWYG than that. It's like the WYSIWYGiest. So the core belief number 6 is this. Web applications need to stop being second-class citizens when it comes to usability and efficiency. When we moved to the web about 20 years ago, we lost some great things. We lost the ability to copy and paste dynamic objects, like maybe a chart out of a spreadsheet and paste it in a Word document, and it was still a chart and it still just worked. We lost my favorite feature, which is undo and redo, because I make a lot of mistakes, and I love being able to just hit Command-Z or Control-Z to go back. We lost dragging in content from the desktop or from other desktop applications. We lost all of this portability. And today, almost all web apps are basically a silo. They don't integrate or play nice with the others. They certainly don't play nice with the desktop. They're traditionally pretty primitive. They're forms-based. They're plagued with uploading and downloading workflow. They don't behave like any other app you're used to. But content is content, after all. I mean, what's the difference between an image online and an image on your desktop, or text online and text on your desktop? Any good web publisher should integrate with your operating system, all of your desktop apps, all of your desktop content, and all of that web content. But PageCloud is the only one that actually does. So for my next trick, I'm going to show you how PageCloud integrates with everything in your desktop. Here I've got a Keynote app open with some shapes, some images, some text objects. I marquee and select a whole bunch, go to my menu and copy it to the clipboard. Now when I paste it in my browser, it gets rasterized as a single layer, preserving transparency, uploaded to the web, and linked to my document so that I can manipulate it like anything else. So I push it off to the side. I get my guides to help me align things. I'm going to go back to another desktop app, this case a spreadsheet. I've got a pie chart that's being driven from a table. So I'm going to copy that chart, paste it in my browser, same thing. Upload it to the web, transparency preserved, and it works just like I'd expect. So I align it with my other circles, and now I've got an image that I want to manipulate, so I'm going to copy it out of my browser, paste it in any photo tool that I like, in my case Pixelmator, and we're going to run an image filter on that. In this case, colorize. I'm pretty partial to PageCloud purple myself, so we'll tint that purple. We'll copy that image data back to the clipboard, select the object in our browser, and paste replace, and it replaces inline. All the technology is just taken care of for you. There's no other web publishing technology in the world that can do this, and we think it's going to change the game forever, because it allows anyone to freely design and publish using tools and practices that they're already familiar with. So the seventh core belief is that any good web publisher should also integrate with this generation of great web content, both static and dynamic. So what I'm doing here is I'm dragging YouTube videos off of YouTube and dropping them on an editable page. And I automatically get fully functional YouTube players. But to PageCloud, it's just content. So I'm going to shrink it and move it around. You see my guides are kicking in to help me align things and make sure my margins are consistent. So I do kind of an artistic layout. You can also do an image search for delicious beverages. And I'm going to copy a picture of a shiny beer and paste it in my browser, except that I think I should have used the one beside it. So I'm going to go back and copy that and paste replace inline in my browser. Or maybe I want to e-commerce enable this page, or drag an image from another website that I control. On Eventbrite, for example, I drag a URL in and I get a ticket sales widget. Heck, I can even go back to the link to the page that has the ticket sales widget and drag that in, and that works too. I can drag in social content like Instagram, but we're not just talking about the photo here. This is a widget that's interactive. It has a comment and like function as well. Or if you want to copy a sign-up form, embed code and paste it in your page, PageCloud automatically knows what to do with this and creates your form. And it's all just content. There's no other publishing technology in the world that integrates with web content so smoothly. Now, that was 7 core principles. I feel like I've forgotten something. Okay, there's actually 8. Of course, it should be open and extensible by third-party developers and designers. You know, our main mission here is to democratize the web, to lower the bar so that everyone can start contributing. But that doesn't mean that this isn't a pro tool. For those with deep design skills or development skills, this thing has been built from the ground up as a published API and a front-end development environment where you can extend and create your own dynamic widgets, reusable actions. The sky's the limit. And I want to show you a couple of those power tools now. So the first thing we're going to use is the web inspector, which comes with most modern browsers. We're going to right-click on a screen element here and say inspect, and up comes our web inspector. And we can modify any of the HTML code or the CSS code. In this case, I'm going to change the button to purple, and we're going to add border radius to round those corners. This is a really simplistic example since I could do that with a palette anyway. But the point is this: when I close my inspector and save my page, any way that I can manipulate that document is fair game. So when I save my page, all my changes go back up. There's no need to dig up source files, FTP them up to a server, and do something like a deploy. This is another world first that's never been done before. The web inspector now isn't just something that you use to debug a problem. It's part of your creation toolkit. And you can do things that we didn't think of to do out of the box. And for the first time ever, this is a two-way communication. This is a really big win for developers. So the next example is we've switched over to the JavaScript console this time. And we're going to do a simple manipulation of this document using jQuery, which we link into the page by default. So I'm going to select 2 objects and write a jQuery command to change the background to color. To blue. No, purple, actually. And you can see that worked. Remember, any way that I can change that document, whether through the source code or for running scripts, is fair game. Now, this is a simplistic example, but imagine I was doing something more sophisticated like a complex search and replace or a complex manipulation of a whole bunch of content on a page. Now, the next example is I'm going to select a few different objects, and we start typing PageCloud in the JavaScript console. And you can see the entire API is exposed into a nice collection of modules for you. So we're going to use a module called alignment, and we're going to call a command called align left, and we're going to pass a little jQuery selector that grabs all selected objects in the editor, and we run it, and they snap to the left. Now, what we get to do with these dev tools is write custom actions. And you can see one I've got saved on my desktop just off to the right. It's a text file. I think it's .action.js. And in this set of content, what I do is scroll down and select a few different images, and I drag this pre-built action onto my page, and it runs, and it performs that routine. In this case, I wrote a little 10-line script which took images and randomly rotates it in a direction, adds a white border and a bit of a drop shadow, and makes it look like a Polaroid. So if this super fancy effect is something I do on all my websites, that's great for a professional designer. And I don't know if you saw that, but I ran it, and then it kind of snapped back and ran again. I wasn't speaking quickly enough, but what's going on is that when you run that action, it actually goes on the undo-redo stack in case I made a mistake, so I can hit undo and unrun my action. A lot of sophistication there. And this is great to automate repetitive tasks, which is a huge win for professionals. So when we were building this functionality, I came across this site that we didn't build. It's Athenos. It's a Greek food site, but I thought the photos were awesome. I guess I was hungry that day. And they have this cool little thing, which I'll show you in a sec. There's a granny head, which pops up in the bottom left corner when you refresh this page. And she kind of goes like this, and it's a visual cue that there's more down there, and you should scroll down the page. And so we were playing around, and we duplicated this site into PageCloud just to play around. So watch when I refresh the page. In the bottom left corner, you'll see there's Granny. I think her name is Yaya, which I think is Greek for granny, but I'm not sure. And what we're going to do now, because this is a PageCloud page, is go into edit mode, and we're going to go find that widget. And when you type JS, you get a full code editor, complete with syntax highlighting, code folding, stubs for common functions. You can see the behavior there. And in fact, there's a whole bunch of other scripts on this page too that do other things. This page turns out to be quite dynamic. Now I'm going to copy that widget to the operating system clipboard, and I'm going to open up another web page. Let's say, I don't know, the PageCloud homepage. And we're going to go into edit mode, and we're going to paste our portable interactive widget onto the PageCloud homepage. See what happens. So we'll move it down to the bottom right, and then we're going to hit save and look to make sure it works live. And there's the PageCloud homepage with animated granny head. And this is why, to this day, sometimes if you go to the homepage of PageCloud, you will see an animated granny head, and that's because I live demoed to someone and I forgot to remove it. Now, you can even save your widgets to the desktop. I'm going to go back there one more time. We're going to copy this to the clipboard, and we're going to open up our favorite text editor, and we're going to paste that code and save it as grannyhead.widget.html. And there it is on my desktop, and I'm going to hit New Tab, and from the PageCloud menu, just hit New Page to get a blank canvas. Now, I have a bunch of sites running, so I have to choose which site I want this to belong to. And I'll just create some sample content. I think I create a text box here. Now, I'm going to drag in that reusable widget, which I could be sharing with a friend or keeping to myself, or maybe uploading in the upcoming PageCloud store. And when I save my brand new page, it's automatically live on the web. And just to prove it, in case you don't believe me, animate granny head. So PageCloud has invented a way to use portable, reusable, interactive widgets on the web that integrate with your file system, with your operating system clipboard, and our own layout engine so that you can create fully dynamic pages. You can even build up your own intellectual property and collect these things, or a library of time-saving tools for professionals if you're banging out sites constantly. This is another huge win for professionals. Now, the last demo I'd like to show you is the workflow of creating a page from scratch. And I did this in my hotel room last night. I sent an email to my designer back home, and I said, give me a one-page PSD with a beautiful design, and I'm going to turn on my screen cam, and I'm going to record and time myself to recreate this. And I want it desktop-friendly, obviously, but I also want it mobile-friendly. Now, that took 13 minutes. And I don't want to show you a 13-minute video, so I've sped it up by 2.3 times. And I'm going to show you in 5 minutes creating something from scratch from top to bottom. The first thing we do is we open that Photoshop file. I'm actually using Pixelmator. Then we create a new page inside PageCloud, and we start creating rectangles. I usually like to do kind of the major layout of the page first. I'll go find an RGB value to figure out what kind of shade of gray that was. And I can see that the sections in the design seem to be about 4 inches tall, so I'll stretch that to 4 inches. And I use the clone tool, and I start creating rectangles down my page. Now, there's 2 of them that had a black background, so I'll grab a couple and change their color to black. I think I forgot a white section down below, so we'll go and add that. And once I've got them in position, I think I resize them to make sure they butt up against each other so there's no blank space showing through. Now that I've got the major sections laid out, I grab all these rectangles and I use an effect called full bleed, which is very popular in web design these days, even though most of our content is going to be centered on the screen. Now I'm ready for my images. So I've got a logo in the Photoshop file, but it was 2 layers. But that's okay. I just select those 2 layers, copy it. It gets flattened as a single image, transparency preserved. I put it in my header, I resize it, and I start working on the major section images. Now these are high-quality images with transparency built in, so they look great when I overlap them, break the grid, and let them bleed into a section below, for example. So I do this image by image, and when I'm done with the major images, I start working on the text. Now, the first thing I do is go back to that Photoshop file, copy some title text, and paste the text right in the browser. I automatically get an editable text box, and all I have to do is figure out things like change the color, maybe tighten up the font a little bit, and work on the line height to make it match my design. And once I've got one done, I clone it, and I start working on the paragraph text. Now, I'm copying the text out of the Photoshop file since I've already done the formatting in PageCloud, and I use a search and replace to inject that new text but keep the formatting that I just spent a couple minutes on. And once I've got a set of title and paragraph done, I clone it, and I move it down to the next section. Big time saver. Now charcoal on black doesn't look very good, so I go in and I change the color to yellow, and then I do this whole search and replace thing and get the text from my Photoshop file. And I've got a couple other sections to do. Now what you're seeing here is deep technology to make a lot of complicated problems look really simple. This is the result of years of R&D. And since launch 4 months ago, PageCloud's accumulated over 15,000 paying customers in 90 countries because we've captured the imagination of people and showed them the web the way they've always wanted, which is open and accessible, a web where anyone can do it. So we're working on our last section here. Just touch up the coloring and do that search and replace one more time. I think after this section, there's 2 more little text boxes in the white section below. We're almost done. Now, I'm going to clone a title because it's almost formatted the way I want, so it's close enough. So I do the search and replace of the text, clone that one more time, and then we, I think, thin up the font a little bit. And the last thing we're going to do is that there was a bit of a nav bar up top with 4 navigation links. So I go back to the Photoshop file, and I just kind of quickly read what those links were. And I'm going to use some paragraph text because it's kind of formatted like what I want, and I just retype over top of it. And I use the clone tool, and I create a few more links, and then I just hit enter on each one of them and rename those links. And they're all perfectly spaced, but the about word is a bit short, so I manually nudge it over to use my eye to balance things, not necessarily an algorithm. Now I hit mobile mode. Now, I get a phone mask here, and if I wanted to, I could completely go to town and redesign specifically what I want my mobile experience to be. But in this case, I want to move quickly, and I really just want to make sure all the content actually fits. Now, the big difference here is that this is well within the skills of anybody that's ever used desktop publishing before. Compare this with handwriting some responsive web design code. It's ridiculously complicated. And it only takes about a minute per page. So one more section to go, and we're going to flip back to desktop mode to make sure that still looks great and we didn't muck anything up. And then we're going to go look at it live. Perfect. So we hit save. Our page is immediately live on the web, and we'll go look in a new tab, and there it is. It looks beautiful. Now, in my hotel, I actually had an iPad mini, and I wanted to make sure it looked great there too. So here you can see it in portrait mode. The text is legible, the spacing's awesome, it's scaled properly, it looks beautiful. I flip to landscape mode, everything gets a tiny bit bigger, but it's doing this viewport scaling thing and it looks beautiful. And I didn't have to touch any of the content. That's desktop content. You see, any modern tablet displays desktop content beautifully with absolutely no change. Now the phone's a bit of an outlier, as are things like iPods. So I tested it on my phone, and now you're starting to see that mobile view. Now I have an iPhone 5, which is I think 4.5 inches or 5 inches diagonal. It doesn't matter if you're using a 4-inch phone or a 6-inch phone. It doesn't matter if you're using an 8-inch tablet or a 10-inch tablet. Because mobile browsers are very different than their desktop cousins. Not a lot of people know this. They do something called viewport scaling. And what that means is that you don't actually have to worry about all the little fiddly resolutions. There's only really 2 sizes in the world, desktop and mobile. Now, by my estimation, that 13 minutes represents several $1,000s of hand coding for templates, for WordPress, or any other modern CMS. But to do it visually in PageCloud was literally minutes. But more importantly, it was possible to do by anyone who understands how to use Keynote, PowerPoint, or Photoshop, which is basically anyone that's ever used a computer before. So I've shown you a bunch of world firsts in the area of web publishing. And PageCloud has dozens of these. I only got to touch on a few today. And we've achieved these because we're thinking very differently about this problem. It's about democratizing it and letting everybody play. I believe that in 5 years' time, we're going to look back and collectively laugh at the idea of hand coding HTML and CSS the way we'd laugh if someone said we had to hand code a Microsoft Word document using XML. It just doesn't make sense. It will seem, by comparison, prehistoric and unnatural, like manually typesetting a printing press. So there's a major technological shift coming where hand coding this stuff goes away and we live in a world with visual editors that are native to the cloud but integrate with all of your desktop apps, your operating system, and all of that great web content. So the browser isn't just the thing that you surf the web with, it's the thing that we all get to create the web with. And I believe that PageCloud is the future of publishing on the web. So my question to you, to your inner child artist, is this. If you could create anything, what would you create? You can find out more about the product at pagecloud.com, and there's a nice promo code there to save 20%. Thanks for having me.